My husband mocked me at dinner with his entire family. Then our daughter stood up and said this. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and tomato sauce, the scent wafting from the bubbling pot on the stove. Sarah wiped her hands on the faded floral apron she always wore when cooking, her heart fluttering with a mix of nervousness and hope. Tonight was important. David's entire family was coming over for dinner. She had spent the afternoon cleaning every corner of their modest home, folding the little napkins just right, and arranging the mismatched chairs around the well-worn table. The small stack of hand-painted dishes, a gift from her grandmother, was set out carefully, each chipped edge a reminder of a simpler life she cherished. Sarah was a woman who lived with soft grace, despite a world that often felt too loud or unforgiving. In her quiet way, she believed that these gatherings could mend the fragile threads of her marriage, weaving a semblance of peace between her and David's relatives. David was late, as usual, his heavy footsteps finally echoing through the creaky hallway. She heard him before she saw him, a low chuckle escaping his lips as he entered, carrying the cynical air he wore like a shadow. "Looks like you've done your best to make this place look presentable," he said, eyes sharp and scanning, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Sarah smiled tightly, swallowing the sting. "I wanted everything to be nice for everyone," she replied softly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. But David just shook his head, stepping into the kitchen without a word. The air changed, heavy and charged, as the rest of the family began to filter in. His mother, Aunt Clara, and cousins she barely knew. The polite greetings and forced smiles masked the tension that settled like an unwelcome fog in the small space. As everyone gathered around the table, a hush fell over the room. Sarah carefully brought out the bowls of food, her hands trembling slightly. She placed a generous serving of pasta in front of David, who picked up his fork with a look that betrayed impatience. "So, Sarah," he began loudly, drawing all eyes, "did you finally figure out how to make something that doesn't taste like cardboard, or was this a miracle?" His laugh was cold, dismissive, and it cut through the room with unforgiving sharpness. The relatives exchanged uneasy glances, some stifling chuckles, others avoiding eye contact. For Sarah, the words struck like stones. Her cheeks flushed deep red, and she clenched her fists beneath the table, fighting the urge to cry. "It's homemade," she said quietly. "I tried really hard." But David wasn't done. "Well, maybe next time you can spare us the torture and just order pizza." The laughter that followed was cruel and loud. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came out. She felt the weight of every gaze upon her, heavy with judgment and mockery. In that moment, Sarah's world shrank to the tiny circle of her own humiliation. The room blurred as tears pricked her eyes, and she swallowed hard, desperate to keep her composure. Her mind raced. Why was she so easily the butt of their jokes? Did they always see her as less, just because she came from a different part of town, or because she didn't have the slick manners and designer clothes that David's family seemed to prize? She tightened her grip on the edge of the table, the rough wood grounding her even as the room spun. Somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered, a quiet resolve that she couldn't quite name yet. But for now, she sat frozen, the laughter ringing in her ears, feeling smaller than she had ever felt before in her life. How had a simple dinner turned into this? How would she face the rest of the night? The stinging looks, the whispered remarks after she passed the serving bowls. Would anyone see the woman she was beneath the awkward smiles and stained apron? She longed for a sign, some knowing glance or even a word of kindness that could pierce through the cold wall of mockery. As plates cleared and voices shifted to caught-up chatter, Sarah's daughter, Lily, tugged gently at her sleeve. The 12-year-old's wide eyes met hers with something neither of them said aloud yet, a silent understanding. "Mom," Lily whispered, "don't let them make you small." The simple words carried weight, a tender plea wrapped in innocent defiance. Sarah's heart clenched at the unexpected strength in Lily's voice. She willed herself to breathe deeply, to remember the courage she had always hidden beneath the quiet, the kindness that refused to back down. Was there a way out of this humiliation? Was there a way to reclaim the dignity that was slipping through her fingers like fine sand? The night was still young, and despite the laughter and glances that felt like daggers, Sarah held the faint hope that this was only the beginning of a story much bigger than a cruel joke at the dinner table. She looked around once more at the faces, some full of smug satisfaction, others uncertain, and she quietly asked herself, how could she rewrite this narrative before the final forkful was eaten and the door slammed shut? Sometimes the hardest battles began in the quietest moments, and perhaps this dinner was one of them. Take a moment. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family gatherings? What did you do when you faced such quiet cruelty? The room felt colder now, the warmth of Sarah's hope dissipating like steam from the simmering pot. David's mocking remarks had opened a floodgate of discomfort that swept through the family members, twisting the atmosphere into something bitter and brittle. His mother cleared her throat awkwardly, looking between her son and daughter-in-law, the unease lining her face almost palpable. Yet no one dared to intervene. Aunt Clara, ever the sharp-eyed observer, offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes, while the cousins exchanged quick glances, scoffing quietly behind half-raised cups of wine. Sarah sat rigid, clutching her napkin as if it could shield her from the sharp shards of their silent judgment. Her hands trembled beneath the table, fingers digging into her lap to anchor herself against the rising tide of humiliation. David wasn't finished. His eyes caught Sarah's in a look that was less teasing and more calculated, a deliberate cut aimed to unravel her resolve. "You know, I keep wondering how you ended up with me," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "With all your simplicity, you're nothing like what my family expected." The word simplicity hung in the air like a noose tightening around Sarah's chest. It wasn't just a comment. It was an unspoken dismissal of her efforts and her very being. A cousin snickered openly, and David chuckled, encouraged by the small ripple of laughter. Sarah's mouth dried up, and she swallowed the first tears that pricked her eyes. The faces surrounding the table blurred, their outlines softening into shadows of disdain. Her heart ached, not only because of David's words, but because no one she loved was stepping in to defend her. Where was the kindness she'd hoped for? Where was the empathy? The tension twisted tighter when David reached across the table, snatching the bowl of salad from Sarah's hands with a dramatic flair. "Maybe if you put as much effort into your cooking as you do complaining about your job, this dinner wouldn't be a disaster," he spat. The group burst into uneasy laughter, and Sarah felt the full weight of isolation that filled the room. She stared down at her bowl, overwhelmed by a wave of helplessness that crashed relentlessly against the fragile walls she built around herself. Her lips quivered, and a sharp pang of self-doubt gnawed at her. Was she truly so inept, so unworthy? The shame was suffocating, and with every sarcastic remark, she felt pieces of her dignity splintering, her identity unraveling beneath David's cruel spotlight. Meanwhile, the room's dynamics grew more complex. Some family members shifted in their chairs uncomfortably. David's youngest brother caught Sarah's eye briefly, something like regret flickering behind his gaze. Yet no words escaped his mouth, and moments later, he returned his gaze to the table, swallowed by the social expectation to remain silent. Sarah's thoughts spiraled in a chaotic dance. Why did no one stand up for her? Was she supposed to endure this quietly, to accept this public dismantling as her place? The pressure to maintain a perfect facade was crushing. She was supposed to be the easygoing wife, the accommodating host, but now she was a spectacle of ridicule. Her vision blurred as tears finally broke free, trickling silently down her cheeks, while the laughter and murmurs continued like a relentless storm. Her daughter Lily's hand briefly brushed against hers, a quiet beacon of solidarity that momentarily steadied her faltering spirit. Even as the laughter grew louder, Sarah's mind retreated inward, grappling with a painful calculus of survival. Could she find the strength to meet David's gaze, to assert who she really was beneath the surface of this hopeful charade? The room felt like a cage, each snide comment another link forged in iron, locking her into a role she despised. She clenched her jaw, willing the humiliation to pass, but it lingered, thick and suffocating, refusing to loosen its grip. She noticed the flicker of discomfort passing briefly across some faces. But ultimately, the silence that no one would break was the loudest voice at that table. No one would publicly challenge David, and Sarah's sense of invisibility deepened in those moments, darkening like a shadow consuming light. As the conversation shifted to lighter, meaningless topics of weather and politics, Sarah sat frozen. Each word from David felt like a verdict passed in slow motion. A dinner that she had hoped would bridge divides had instead become a battleground where she was the only casualty. The weight of them all, his family, his judgments, the unspoken expectations, pressed down with merciless force. Her stomach tightened in knots, and she realized that tonight, right here, she was seen by everyone as less than she was. More than ever, her daughter's quiet encouragement echoed in her mind. Don't let them make you small. But how could she stand tall when every word cut her down? Amid the laughter and shards of broken dignity, Sarah's mind grappled with a desperate question. How much more could she endure before she broke entirely? Has there been a moment where you felt powerless, surrounded by people who should have been your allies? How did you cope with that silence? As the laughter faded into the clinking of dishes being cleared away, Sarah found herself retreating into the corner of their small living room, the weight of David's words pressing against every breath she took. She sank onto the faded couch, feeling the rough fabric bite into her skin, a physical reminder of just how far she had already been pushed. The once vibrant dinner now felt like a cruel performance, a painful spectacle where she was the unwilling star cast in the worst role imaginable. Every glance, every snide remark hovered in her mind like a relentless echo that refused to quiet down. Her heart ached, not just from embarrassment, but from an overwhelming sense of loneliness. She was surrounded by people, yet felt utterly alone. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the steaming cup of tea that Lily had quietly brought her. The warmth was oddly comforting, but even so, it did little to chase away the cold knot of self-doubt tightening inside her. Sarah's mind was a swirl of tumultuous thoughts. Was she not enough? Had she failed somehow, both as a wife and a mother? Her eyes moved to the door, imagining it wide open with an escape route just beyond her reach. But the reality was harsher. There was no running from this moment, no undoing the humiliation she'd just endured. As Lily sat beside her, her small hand resting gently over Sarah's defenses flickered. Maybe she wasn't completely invisible after all. Lily's presence was a fragile lifeline in a sea of despair. "Mom," she whispered, eyes bright with unshed tears, "you don't have to stay silent." Her voice trembled, just enough to reveal the gravity beneath her words, a courage that both comforted and surprised Sarah. For a moment, her daughter's vulnerability pierced through the fog of shame, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Yet, even with Lily's quiet support, Sarah found herself wrestling with the crushing weight of failure. She had tried to build a family, to nurture love, to hold together the fragile threads of their lives. But the mounting walls of judgment threatened to trap her inside a prison where hope was just another forgotten dream. In the days that followed, Sarah woke with a heaviness that settled deep in her bones. The laughter from that night haunted her, replaying in cruel loops each time she closed her eyes. Her reflection in the mirror became a stranger's, a woman whose smile seemed forced, whose eyes betrayed exhaustion and doubt. Even mundane tasks felt like Herculean efforts. She meticulously avoided social interactions, fearing yet another moment of exposure or ridicule. Within the walls of her own home, she felt suffocated by silence. David's cold avoidance replaced his earlier cruelty, and their conversations were clipped and shallow, as if both were painfully aware of a dividing chasm widening between them. Despite the darkness settling in, a flicker of hope emerged unexpectedly through Maria, Sarah's next-door neighbor and longtime friend. Maria had always been a quiet observer, someone who understood without needing many words. One afternoon, seeing the weariness etched deeply into Sarah's face, Maria simply sat down beside her on the creaky porch steps. Without judgment or pity, she spoke softly. "You don't have to carry this alone, Sarah." Her words were a balm, a reminder that even in moments of deepest despair, human connection could offer a path forward. Encouraged by Maria's steadfast kindness, Sarah began tentatively to share pieces of her pain, opening a door that had long been sealed shut. It was not a cure, but a beginning, a fragile thread of resilience weaving into the tapestry of her battered spirit. Yet the outside world proved unforgiving. At work, snippets of gossip began circulating, fueled by the casual cruelty of coworkers who sensed vulnerability and seized it mercilessly. Sarah's confidence crumbled further, the whispered conversations and sideways glances making her shrink daily into herself. She found it harder to meet friends or answer phone calls, overwhelmed by a pressure she could neither ignore nor escape. During the rare quiet moments, she questioned whether she was destined to live beneath the shadow of humiliation forever. Was this the definition of her life now? A continuous cycle of being torn down with little hope for repair? But deep within, something stirred, a small yet stubborn ember refusing to be extinguished. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky bled hues of orange and violet, Sarah sat by the window, tracing invisible patterns on the glass. Lily approached, her youthful strength a quiet reassurance. "Mom, remember when I stood up that night? You can stand up too. It's okay to be scared, but you don't have to be silent." Her words filled the room with an unexpected power. A gentle command wrapped in love. Sarah looked into her daughter's eyes, seeing not just innocence, but a reflection of a courage she desperately needed to reclaim. The seed of her resolve began to take root amidst the tangled weeds of despair. She could no longer remain trapped in shadows. With this newfound flicker of will, Sarah started writing, an act both private and transformative. Late at night, when the house was silent and her thoughts loud, she scribbled her fears, hopes, and plans onto the blank pages of a worn notebook. Writing became a refuge, a way to reclaim her voice that had been so cruelly stolen. Each word was a small victory, a step toward rebuilding the woman David had tried to break. She realized that healing would be neither quick nor easy, but it was hers to command. And somewhere, between the pages, between the tears and the quiet moments of strength, Sarah began to envision a future where she would no longer be the subject of mockery, where her worth could no longer be denied by anyone. When you face moments that shatter your confidence, what small actions help you regain your strength? Have you found unexpected allies in your darkest times? The breaking point arrived quietly, like the slow cracking of ice beneath a heavy weight. It wasn't a loud argument or a dramatic confrontation. Rather, it was a moment so raw and painful that it shattered the fragile equilibrium Sarah had been desperately trying to maintain. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, Sarah found herself in the kitchen alone with David. The dim light flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the room, mirroring the tension coiling in her chest. David's gaze was cold, dismissive as always, yet beneath his usual sneer lingered a hardness that cut deeper than words. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," he muttered, voice low but heavy with accusation. "You think you're better than me now?" His words were venomous, aimed to wound, the betrayal of his disdain crushing her spirit even further. Sarah's chest heaved, breath catching in her throat. For a moment, she said nothing, the silence between them deafening. Then, in a voice trembling with pain and defiance, she finally spoke. "I'm tired of being mocked, David. Tired of being made to feel small in my own home, in front of your family, in front of our daughter." Her words, though soft, carried a newfound strength that took even her by surprise. "I deserve respect, not ridicule." At that moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. And then, an unexpected knock sounded at their front door. Surprised, Sarah opened it to find her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Daniels, clutching a small basket of freshly baked bread, wrapped in a faded linen cloth. Mrs. Daniels was a woman of quiet wisdom, known for her kindness and for seemingly appearing at the moments you needed her most. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside and looked directly at David. "It's never okay to tear down the people you love," she said gently but firmly. The sharpness in her voice was impossible to ignore. David looked taken aback, his posture stiffening, as Mrs. Daniels continued. "Families are built on respect and kindness, not cruelty." Her gaze briefly flicked to Sarah, who felt a surge of gratitude and disbelief. In that small, unexpected act of solidarity, Sarah's hope blossomed. A crack had formed in the armor of cold indifference that had surrounded her for so long. Stunned by the intervention, David's usual smug expression faltered. For the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a very human moment of reckoning. The other neighbors, who had heard the quiet exchange from their windows, began to gather outside, their quiet murmurs a chorus of support that stretched beyond the walls of Sarah's home. News of Mrs. Daniels' visit spread quickly, and soon, whispers of the family's dysfunctional evening reached the ears of David's relatives who hadn't attended. Their judgment wavered when confronted not with mockery, but with the unexpected strength of a woman refused to be broken and the comforting solidarity of community. Inside the home, encouraged by this subtle but powerful show of support, Sarah took a deep breath and made a decisive choice. She would no longer shrink beneath David's cruel words or the mocking laughter of his family. The humiliation she had endured would no longer define her. With Lily's unwavering support simmering beneath her courage, Sarah began to rebuild, not just her confidence, but the very foundation of her life. She started attending a local community group where women shared stories of resilience and empowerment, absorbing wisdom and strength from strangers who quickly became new allies. It was a slow, sometimes painful process, but every small victory refreshed her spirit. David, meanwhile, found himself confronted not only with Sarah's rising voice, but also with the growing disapproval of those around him. His cold dismissal had morphed into isolation. The relatives who had once laughed alongside him now exchanged uneasy looks, their earlier amusement replaced by quiet discomfort. The power balance began to shift, not abruptly, but palpably. Sarah saw this change, not as a triumph over her husband, but as an affirmation of her own worth and the quiet justice of standing tall despite the wounds. The family dinners, that had been battlegrounds, turned into moments of reflection, where conversations carried a new weight and respect began to weave cautiously onto the frayed fabric of their relationships. Amid these changes, Lily remained a constant beacon of hope, her bravery the spark that ignited Sarah's determination. One evening, as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets under a tapestry of stars, Lily reached for her mother's hand. "You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for," she said softly, eyes shining with love and conviction. Sarah smiled, tears glistening, feeling the deep truth of those words seep into her bones. The journey from pain to empowerment hadn't been easy, but the darkness had paved the way for a new kind of light. It was a light born not out of revenge or anger, but out of compassion, courage, and the unshakable bond between mother and daughter. As Sarah looked back on that night of humiliation, she no longer saw it as a breaking point, but as the catalyst for transformation. In the midst of the deepest despair, a surprising act of kindness had cracked open a path towards healing. She had been seen, not just as a subject of mockery, but as a woman worthy of respect and love. The past did not disappear, but it had lost its power to define her. And as she prepared to face whatever came next, Sarah knew one thing with certainty. The strength to reclaim her dignity had always been inside her, waiting for the moment she dared to stand up for herself. How did you find the strength to rise beyond your pain? The day Sarah chose to confront David openly marked a turning point, not only in her life, but in the tangled web of their marriage and family dynamics. It happened on a crisp Saturday morning, when the sunlight streamed through the living room window just right, illuminating the dust motes that danced midair, like tiny sparks of hope waiting to ignite. David sat on the worn sofa, scrolling through his phone with a careless indifference that had become all too familiar to Sarah. Gathering every ounce of courage, she crossed the room and faced him directly, steadied by the unwavering support that Lily's presence had given her over the past weeks. "David," she began, voice clear, "I can't live like this anymore. The way you disrespect me, mock me in front of your family, it has to stop." David looked up. Surprise flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "What are you talking about? You're making a big deal over nothing," he said, but Sarah was no longer the woman who'd swallowed her pain in silence. "It's not nothing to me," she replied firmly. "I'm your wife, the mother of your daughter. I deserve respect, love, and kindness, not constant belittlement. You've made me feel small for too long, and I'm done with that." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. David's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if this confrontation might erupt into more bitterness. But then, the unexpected happened. A slow, reluctant nod punctuated his acknowledgement. It was the first sign of change, however faint, in the way he regarded her. This confrontation rippled through their relationship and into the family sphere faster than Sarah had anticipated. David's once carefree barbs became cautious comments, his remarks carefully measured to avoid crossing lines he previously ignored. The relatives who had gathered sporadically around their home noticed the shift. The mocking laughter faded, replaced by more polite, if tentative, conversations. Sarah found herself holding on to moments of genuine connection, moments where respect was not just expected, but practiced. The distant echoes of past humiliation lingered, but their sting diminished with every act of kindness and every boundary Sarah firmly set. At work, Sarah felt the tentative roots of restored confidence take hold. She no longer shied away from colleagues or abandoned conversations mid-sentence. Instead, she began voicing her opinions, sharing her ideas with a quiet but unmistakable strength. The casual gossip that once preyed on her vulnerabilities lost power in the face of her growing self-assurance. Behind the scenes, new friends, many forged in the warmth of the community group she joined, cheered her on, reminding her that no one was meant to endure cruelty alone. Their words buoyed her, and slowly the fractured image she saw in the mirror began to reflect back a woman who had survived storms and was emerging stronger. Despite the progress, the road to healing was not linear. There were relapses into doubt, days when the memories of humiliation returned unbidden, and nights when loneliness wrapped around her like a suffocating cloak. But in those vulnerable moments, Sarah leaned heavily on Lily's unwavering presence. Her daughter had blossomed into more than just a child. She was Sarah's confidant, protector, and fierce advocate. On more than one occasion, Lily's sharp insights and bold responses kept David in check, asserting boundaries and reminding him, sometimes in front of others, that the woman he had once mocked was now a force to be reckoned with. One particularly poignant evening, Sarah and David attended a family gathering that once would have been a minefield of discomfort and ridicule. Instead, Sarah felt a solid steadiness beneath her feet, as she navigated conversations with subtle grace. David's former allies, present in numbers, watched, some with skepticism, others with newfound respect. When one cousin made a veiled joke, Sarah met it with calm firmness, her words neither defensive nor angry, but clear and resolute. The room shifted. She could feel the eyes upon her, measuring, recalibrating their judgments. For a moment, the past and present collided, and then the weight of old humiliations lifted, leaving space for a future shaped by dignity. This confrontation and gradual shift were more than just a change in behavior. They were a transformation in Sarah's identity. Where once she had been timid and overshadowed, she now stood tall, her voice carrying the quiet power of someone who had reclaimed their truth. The justice she sought wasn't about punishing David, but about asserting her inherent worth and demanding it be honored. And in doing so, she forged a path not only for herself, but for Lily. A roadmap of resilience, courage, and self-respect that would ripple through generations. Sometimes, facing those who hurt us requires incredible courage. How have you found your inner strength to stand up and reclaim your power when everything seemed lost? Share your story, because your voice matters. Months passed since that pivotal confrontation, and with each sunrise, Sarah felt herself weaving a life threaded with newfound strength, grace, and quiet triumph. The house that once echoed with the sharp barbs of ridicule now hummed softly with laughter, gentle conversations, and the tender sounds of a family slowly healing. Sarah moved through her days with a confidence that bloomed naturally, no longer guarded but open, her smile genuine and her gaze steady. She had become a woman who knew her worth, not because others had crowned her so, but because she had claimed it for herself through every tear shed, every night spent doubting, and every morning she chose to rise stronger. The garden outside, once neglected and overrun with weeds, had transformed alongside Sarah's journey. Vibrant flowers blossomed where thorny vines had strangled fragile shoots. A reflection of the delicate yet enduring beauty she nurtured within her own soul. Lily thrived at her side, a beacon of joy and resilience, glowing brighter in the warm light of their collective healing. Their bond deepened into a fortress of love and mutual respect, strengthened by the trials they faced and conquered together. Sarah marveled at how her daughter's courage had been both shield and spark, reminding her that even the smallest voices can roar when given the chance. David's presence remained a complex thread in their story, a man slowly learning the weight of his past cruelty and the hard work it took to rebuild trust. He attended therapy sessions suggested by their counselor, an effort that marked a tentative but important step toward redemption. While the scars of earlier wounds lingered, the atmosphere in their home shifted palpably. Arguments diminished in frequency and sharpness, replaced by conversations that sought understanding rather than domination. It was not perfection, far from it, but progress was woven into the quiet moments of apology, acknowledgement, and change. Sarah's experience rippled beyond the walls of her home. She began sharing her story with others, finding powerful release and purpose in vulnerability. Speaking at local women's groups and online forums, she lent voice to the silent suffering many endured, encouraging others to stand firm in their worth. Her message resonated deeply, that no one should accept humiliation, and that even the smallest act of courage can light a path to freedom and self-respect. Through her advocacy, Sarah found an unexpected community of kindred spirits, women and men who had faced their own battles and sought to rewrite their narratives with dignity and love. One afternoon, as the sun spilled golden warmth through the window, Sarah sat with Lily and David, the three of them laughing over a shared memory, a scene so ordinary, yet profoundly different from the past. The table was filled with simple dishes cooked with patience and pride, far removed from the cold dinners of years ago. The family was no longer bound by fear or scorn, but held together by layers of forgiveness and the commitment to grow. Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude, not for the broken past, but for the healing that had taken root. She understood now more than ever the power of standing up for herself and for those she loved. The humiliation she once bore like a heavy cloak had become the foundation for an unshakable strength that would carry her forward. Sarah's journey was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder that dignity is not given, it is claimed. She smiled softly at Lily, whispering, "You showed me the way, brave girl. Together, we are unstoppable." And as the evening light danced around them, Sarah knew that their story was just beginning. A story of hope, renewal, and the enduring power of love. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.